He waited in the corner, the shadows softly hugging him as he leaned against the wall. The large conference room was filled with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of coffee cups. His name was David, and he had come to this meeting with a heavy heart and a mind full of dreams. Everyone seemed so sure of themselves. They laughed confidently, discussing projections and goals. David was different. He felt like an outsider, a ghost amongst the living. As the clock ticked toward the hour, David took a deep breath. Words like associate can often feel like chains, binding you to a role you didn't choose. He watched the key players of the company, the ones who would soon take their seats at the long, polished table at the center of the room. They were all senior managers, directors, and vice presidents, clad in crisp suits and radiating an air of authority. David's stomach twisted with anxiety. He had worked hard to get to this point, but at that moment he felt invisible. After all those late nights, the spreadsheets, and the endless meetings, he wanted recognition. He wanted respect, but here he was, just a guy waiting in the corner. As the minutes passed, he replayed his journey in his mind, how he had started as an intern, the long hours he had spent learning the ropes. He remembered the excitement he felt when he first joined the team, imagining a future full of possibilities. But the confidence of others seemed to overshadow his own, like the sun blocking out the moon. Sometimes it felt like his voice disappeared in a sea of louder, more assertive ones. Finally, the time for the meeting arrived. One by one, the key players made their way to the table. They took their seats, and David could see the flicker of determination in their eyes. They belonged. He admired them, almost envying how easily they fit into their roles. The question pierced through the room like a sharp knife. All eyes turned to him. The comfortable chatter faded, and the air filled with tension. David felt his heart race. I have it right here," he stammered, his hands shaking slightly as he fished the folder from his bag. He could feel the heat creeping up his neck and the weight of their gazes pressing down upon him. As he approached the table, he noticed whispers ripple through the group. Those unspoken words loomed over him as he placed the presentation in front of Carol. She smiled, but it didn't mask the uncertainty that hung in the air. Before the presentation began, David mustered every ounce of courage he could find within. He glanced over the table, searching for a connection among the faces. He saw eager faces, but more than that, he saw an opportunity. At that moment, something shifted within him. An urge surged, a primal need to prove himself. Without overthinking, he made a choice. Inspired by a sense of determination, he took the empty seat at the head of the table. The room grew quiet, and all eyes turned to him. He could hear someone whisper, "It didn't matter. All that mattered was this," a moment he could seize. "Excuse me," he began, his voice steady. "I know I'm the newest member of the team, but my ideas might just surprise you." At first, he felt the weight of their stares, disbelief mixed with curiosity. Then he pressed on, outlining his ideas confidently. The shock began to fade. He saw Carol lean in, her interest peaking. A few others nodded slowly, their skepticism turning to intrigue. As he spoke, David could feel the energy shift. He watched as expressions transformed from uncertainty to contemplation. It was as if a dam had broken and a flood of thoughts emerged. For the first time, he felt the power of his voice, a force he never knew he had. "Here's the issue we're currently facing," he explained, pointing to the charts. "If we reallocate some resources, we could improve our efficiency by at least 20%. To his surprise, Carol chimed in, "That's an interesting perspective, David. I like where you're going with this." For the first time, David experienced people working together, discussing his ideas. They built on what he had said, swaying from skepticism to thinking. Each nod, each thoughtful pause chipped away at the barrier he thought was unbreakable. As the discussion continued, he sensed the tide turning. He earned respect, even if it was just the fleeting kind found in shared ideas and collaboration. The walls he felt around him began to crack and fade. After a while, Carol turned to him and said, "You've had some great points, David." His heart raced. The word hung in the air like a revelation. He asked, trying to mask the disbelief in his tone. "Yes, really. Everyone has a voice here, so let's hear yours in full," she said, her eyes bright with possibility. For the rest of the meeting, David leaned into his new role. He no longer felt like the nervous kid standing in the corner. The shadows that held him before evaporated as he found his place at the table. He absorbed every comment, every suggestion, transforming them into fuel for his ambitions. As the meeting drew to a close, the atmosphere shifted even more. David had shared his ideas and they had taken root. The chatter resumed, but now it felt fuller, richer, and infused with a sense of new beginnings. With every smile exchanged, he realized he belonged. The conference table wasn't just a slab of polished wood, it became a symbol of opportunity, a platform that would allow him to rise. When the meeting ended, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor echoed through the room. People filtered out, but a few lingered to offer their thoughts. Carol approached him, her expression sparkling with enthusiasm. "You did great, thank you," he replied, his voice carrying a weight he had never felt before. As the room emptied, David stood up, catching a glimpse of his reflection in the glass that surrounded him. For a moment, he didn't see a nervous associate, he saw potential. The sun began to set outside, showering the room in golden light. David stepped out of the conference room, feeling the warmth of that transition. Each step felt lighter, as if the weight he had carried had been lifted. The shadow of that corner no longer loomed over him. Instead, he stepped into the glow of possibility. From that day on, David kept returning to that conference room, not as a ghost waiting in the corner, but as a leader taking his place at the table. He had transformed not only his role, but also his outlook. The journey was just beginning, but he was ready. He smiled, knowing he would always remember the moment he chose to step forward from the shade and claim his rightful place. Each conference, each project, and each discussion became an opportunity to shine, showing everyone that even the quietest voices could be heard. And sometimes the best ideas come from where you least expect them. In that moment, he realized he had become more than an associate. He was a vital part of a story still unfolding. This was only the beginning. He waited in the corner, his heart racing like a drum echoing in an empty hall. The conference room bustled with energy, a swirl of laughter and chatter bouncing off the walls. But for David, it felt like a different universe. As he stood there, he could almost see the division, the bright, animated world of confident executives in sharp suits on one side, and him, just a shadow, barely holding his ground on the other. The room was filled with power players, veterans of the company who seemed to command the very air they breathed. They leaned back in their chairs, exuding a calm authority while casually tossing ideas around like confetti. To David, who'd only recently earned the title of junior analyst, it felt like an impossible chasm to cross. He remembered the first time he walked into this place. Fresh out of college, armed with a dream and a head full of theories, he thought he'd hit the jackpot finding a job here. But now, weeks into the role, he felt dwarfed by the tremendous expectations looming over him. Every day, he buried his head in spreadsheets and reports, feverishly trying to keep up. But here he was again waiting in the corner, grappling with the weight of silence that wrapped around him like a thick fog. As people continued settling in, David felt that familiar pang of self-doubt. "They probably think I don't belong here," he whispered to himself, peering out from behind the shadows. Almost as if the universe conspired against him, he caught sight of a group of senior managers sharing a joke, their laughter ringing bright as if mocking his unease. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second pulling him deeper into his apprehension. Would they notice him? Would they put him on the agenda? He couldn't shake the feeling of being stuck in a cycle of invisibility. After all, when you're new and untested, who really listens to the quiet ones? Finally, the meeting coordinator, a sharp, focused woman named Linda, stepped to the front and clapped her hands to gather attention. "All right, everyone." The murmurs faded into silence, all eyes now directed toward her. "I want to begin our session with an update from each department." The air tinged with the scent of fresh coffee as David shifted nervously from one foot to the other. The first few speakers offered their updates, their voices strong and clear. Names he barely recognized flew through the air like musical notes, each a powerful reminder of how far removed he felt from their world. And then, just as David began to consider sneaking out, Linda's gaze fell back to him. Panic shot through him like a bolt of electricity. The breath caught in his throat as a dozen eyes turned their curiosity toward him. It was one thing to analyze numbers alone, sitting in the comfort of his cubicle. It was another to stand before the table, the polished surface gleaming under the harsh lights like a stage he was unprepared to grace. "David," she prompted, her tone gentle yet firm. That single sentence hung in the air. He'd been invited to share. For a moment, doubt threatened to choke him. But amid the uncertainty, a flicker of something else ignited within him, a spark of resolve. Maybe this was his chance. Slowly, with a deep breath, he pushed himself away from the wall and approached the table. As he walked, the room felt both alive and suffocating. His palms were clammy, heart thudding louder with every step. He glanced down at his notes, fighting to calm his racing mind as he stood at the head of the table, a place he had never envisioned himself occupying. So I've been looking into the sales numbers from the last quarter," he stammered, his voice barely breaking through the silence, but then it gained strength. "What we've noticed is that our margins have decreased in several regions." He glanced up, meeting eyes, some filled with surprise, others with something resembling admiration. Noticing their engaged faces, he pressed on. "For example, I propose reallocating resources from regions where performance is flat." As he continued, he found a rhythm. The words flowed more easily and an unexpected confidence emerged. Feedback came swiftly from the corner of the table. Carol, a senior manager with a reputation for being tough but fair, nodded thoughtfully. "David, this is good." The wave of validation pushed him further, transforming his nervousness into determination. And then other voices chimed in, building on his ideas, breaking down barriers with each thoughtful remark. With every nod, he felt weight lift from his shoulders, the fog clearing. He was no longer just the junior associate. He was a contributing force, breathing life into discussion, engaging the room like never before. Something shifted as the conversation blossomed. It wasn't just about numbers anymore, it was about teamwork, collaboration, and the synergy of shared ideas. David felt a connection forming, the room filled with energy, an electric current running between them as thoughts sparked and ignited. Before long, Linda waved her hands to capture the attention again. All right, let's summarize our action points from this discussion, she said, but David's heart raced with questions. Had he really done that? Had he earned respect? As the meeting wrapped up, the group buzzed with excitement, buoyed by the momentum created around his suggestion. And then it happened, a question from the corner. Months of waiting, of feeling invisible, receded in that single moment. He felt the eyes on him shift from skepticism to respect. Nodding, overwhelmed but thrilled, he replied, absolutely. As he left the conference room, a kaleidoscope of emotions swirled within him: elation, pride, and the courage that had eluded him for so long. The walls of that room transformed within his mind, becoming not just a place of doubt, but a landmark of triumph. Weeks rolled into months, and the project grew. David thrived. He spent countless late nights refining strategies, building connections with colleagues, and presenting revised proposals. Each step further anchored him in his newfound place. The once uncertain associate grew into a formidable player in the company. His hard work caught the attention of the higher-ups, and before long, David found himself in the center of important discussions, not only participating but leading them. The very same conference room, once an intimidating landscape where he waited in the corner, became the backdrop for his evolving story. One day, as they prepared for a critical final meeting to present the project, David caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection of the glass wall. No longer was he just the quiet guy who stood against the wall. He was a leader, someone with insight and valuable contributions. As the executives filtered in, David stood at the head of the table, ready to present the culmination of all his hard work. Each person settled in, their faces excited and attentive. A sense of calm washed over him. He had earned this moment. Linda opened the meeting. Today, we're graced with a comprehensive proposal from David. The weight of her words hung in the air, and David felt electric. He stepped up to the easel with confidence, his hands steady holding the projector remote. Thank you all for being here, he started, his voice resonating through the room, reaches every corner. He dove into the strategy, fully aware of the stakes. He spoke passionately about his ideas, drawing on every ounce of encouragement and belief he'd slowly nurtured over the months. The tables had turned, his name no longer followed by hesitance, but by expectation. As he finished, applause broke out like a warm embrace filling the air. I think this is a game changer, one executive exclaimed. Every smile, every nod fueled his belief that his journey was just beginning. Looking around the room, where once he had felt like a ghost, David now imagined a vibrant future woven through the very fabric of their discussions. Longed no longer in the corner, but anchored at the head of the table, a leader exploring uncharted territory. As the meeting adjourned, he felt an ache in his throat, not from fear but from triumph. The knowledge that he had carved his place in a world once so distant brought tears to his eyes. Each step away from that polished table felt lighter than the last. He remembered the day he had stood waiting in the corner, his heart full of hesitation, a time when he wondered if he would ever share his voice. And now he was ready for whatever came next. The head seat at the conference table was just the beginning, a launching pad into a future brimming with possibilities. Across the room, he caught Linda's eye. She offered a knowing smile that lit up the entire space, a silent understanding of the transformation that had taken place. A nod of recognition that life can change in a heartbeat, and every moment within the walls of the office had brought him closer to this very point. David took one final look around the room before stepping out into the hallway, excitement bubbling inside him. The march of opportunity awaited, and he was no longer just an observer. He was a participant in a grand narrative, his own story ready to unfold. He waited in the corner, heart pounding, the sounds of the bustling conference room swirling around him. The air was electric with conversation, laughter, and clinking coffee cups. Yet in that vibrant chaos, David felt like a mere shadow, a silent observer trapped in a world where he didn't quite belong. The walls were adorned with pictures of triumph, beaming faces of executives who once stood where he was now, but with confidence instead of self-doubt. Each image seemed to mock him, whispering tales of success while he lingered at the fringes. Today was crucial. The company faced challenges, and David had spent hours compiling data that could change the course of their strategy. But here he was, hesitant, watching as the key players filed into the room. It felt like a weight, a reminder that he was new, and in a place where dominance seemed to roam freely, he felt the weight of being overlooked. Linda, the lead manager, took her place at the front. She commanded attention with her fierce energy, and as she began the meeting, David's pulse quickened. His palms were slick with sweat, the notes he clutched felt slippery as he fought against the urge to bolt. Everyone around the table appeared assured, faces lit with enthusiasm over the potential at hand. Why couldn't he feel that same confidence? Just then, Linda turned her eyes toward him. The room felt still, the question hanging in the air like a heavy fog. All eyes snapped to him. He stammered, the words busily dancing in his mind but escaping his lips. The laughter faded, replaced by a thick anticipation as he stood there, the murmurs of uncertainty climbing higher. Go ahead, David, she urged kindly, tilting her head slightly. There it was again, that push. Taking a deep breath, David stepped forward, warily clutching his notes. I've been analyzing the sales data from the last quarter, he began, his voice echoing just a little. He could see a flicker of interest in Linda's eyes as he shared his findings. At first, silence filled the room. It felt like throwing a stone into a still pond, ripples but no immediate waves. Then Carol, one of the company's senior managers, leaned in. Interesting approach, David. The question hung in the air, a ropes and ladders kind of moment, and David suddenly felt the ground start to shift beneath him. I've outlined a strategy, he said, finding strength he didn't know he had. He turned to the slides he'd prepared, pointing out his projections. As his words flowed, something remarkable happened. Confidence began to fill the space where self-doubt had resided. He elaborated on market trends, illustrating where the company could push its edges. Ideas began swirling around the table, conversations sparked, and suddenly David felt the energy lift. Everyone was engaged, firing off suggestions, building upon the seeds he had planted. It no longer felt like just him talking, it felt like a partnership. Each nod from others fueled his spirit. He found his voice, each word gaining clarity, conviction guiding him. Finally, when he concluded, the room erupted into conversation. Linda was smiling, Carol engaged in a discussion with another manager about David's ideas. This is exactly the direction we need, Linda confirmed, looking directly at David. Those words reverberated through him like a sweet melody no one else could hear. The disbelief bubbled to the surface and he felt exposed, raw. Linda said, a hint of laughter in her voice, "You've shown initiative." After the meeting, people filtered out, and David felt as if he had shed an old skin. He had come in waiting in the corner, but he was leaving with a purpose, embraced by newfound respect. The buzz of excitement carried him forward as he discussed plans with Carol, who offered his insights on how to refine the project. Over the next few weeks, the project took shape under David's guidance. He poured his heart and energy into every detail, and it didn't go unnoticed. Colleagues began approaching him for input, and he found himself surrounded by collaborative spirits. Questions flowed naturally, coffee cups were exchanged, and for the first time he felt like he was part of a family striving for success. One afternoon, in the thick of preparations, Linda summoned him into her office. The walls were lined with accolades, pictures of achievements, and the air thrummed with aspiration. "David," she said, leaning forward, "I want you to lead the presentation at next week's company meeting." The weight of her words landed heavily, vibrating through him. He echoed the concept, stirring excitement and fear in equal measure. But there was no backing down now. He had clawed his way up to this moment. "Yes, we need your voice and your creativity," she insisted, her unwavering gaze anchoring him. The days that followed were an exhilarating whirlwind of nights spent rehearsing and refining his slides, crafting every word, anticipating the questions, and visualizing the room filling with eager faces. Then came the day of the presentation. He stood backstage, his heart racing in sync with the ticking clock. The conference room housed the company's top executives, the very people who had once seemed so out of reach. As the moment drew near, David took a deep breath, letting it fill him with strength. They had journeyed together from that day in the corner to here. He could feel it in every fiber of his being. It was time to own his place. When he took the stage, a wave of nerves hit him, but he remembered the energy that had sparked the earlier meeting. "Today I want to share a vision," he began, his voice ringing out with the confidence he had built. He led them through what had transpired since that first day, igniting discussions about growth, strategy, and innovation. He painted a vivid picture of a brighter future, one where their collective efforts would lead to new horizons. As he spoke, connection wove through the room. The executives leaned in, nodding and making notes. He was no longer waiting in the shadows, but guiding everyone toward the light. When he finally wrapped up, silence reigned for a moment as everyone absorbed what he had laid before them. And then applause erupted, a cascade of respect that washed over him like a warm breeze. Linda stood up, beaming with pride. "This is the kind of leadership we need." Her words echoed in his heart, sealing the transformation that had taken place. As the applause continued, David soaked it all in. He had emerged from the darkness of the corner to take his seat at the head of the table, standing shoulder to shoulder with people he had once aimed to impress. The meeting concluded with discussions sparked by his insights, the excitement and energy tangible. David left the room that day not just as the junior analyst, but as a leader ready to pave the way for new possibilities. As the echo of heels on the floor faded behind him, he looked out the window, gazing at a sprawling city that glittered in the distance. The sun began its descent, casting warm hues of orange and pink that danced across the skyline. This was his moment. So much had changed. He felt it in how he stood, how he embraced each opportunity and each obstacle. No longer would he wait in the corner, for he had claimed his space. The head seat at the conference table was more than just a position. It was a mark of resilience, of bold transformation. David stepped into the future, heart open and mind racing with potential. This was only the beginning of a journey that had started with a spark in the corner. Clarity and purpose guided him now every step of the way as he carved out a destiny of his own making. Each day, each meeting was a canvas waiting for the strokes of his ambition, and he was ready to paint it bright. He waited in the corner, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The conference room buzzed with lively chatter, a sea of confident voices, each one a reminder of how far he felt from belonging. David leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of his own uncertainty. Today was the day of the big meeting, the kind that could define careers, and there he was, just a junior analyst lost in the crowd. As he fidgeted with his tie, the sight of executives parading into the room sent another wave of anxiety crashing through him. They glided in wearing tailored suits that spoke of authority, their faces lit with self-assured smiles. In their eyes, he could see a confidence he wished he had. They were seasoned, experienced, and he was just a newcomer, barely 3 months into his role. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythm taunting him with every passing second. He watched as Linda, the team leader, set her briefcase down with a thud, commanding instant attention. She had a reputation for being direct and demanding. Today, though, he had something crucial to share. He had spent hours poring over data, searching for insights that could help steer the company toward a more profitable future. But as the room filled, doubts crept in. He thoughts like those wrapped around him like vines, squeezing tighter with every breath. Linda's voice broke through his spiral. "Let's get started, everyone," she announced, her tone firm. His pulse quickened, anxiety bubbling just beneath the surface. In a swift motion, she scanned the room. The moment hung in the air like a suspended note, and the room fell into an expectant silence. David felt all eyes on him, the weight of scrutiny pressing down. He whispered, though he knew he had to rise to the occasion. He stepped away from the wall, legs slightly trembling, and moved to face the table. He clutched the notes tightly, aware that he was on the brink of exposing himself, not just his knowledge, but his vulnerability. I've been analyzing the last quarter's sales data," he began, voice wavering at first. The words felt heavy, stumbling from his mouth like rocks. He swallowed, glancing at the charts he'd prepared. He glanced up, desperately searching for a flicker of interest in their expressions. For a moment, the room remained still, processing. And then Carol, a senior director known for her sharp critiques, spoke up. That question caught him by surprise. It was as if someone had tossed him a lifeline. Well, he responded, feeling more grounded now, by utilizing tailored marketing campaigns that directly address customer needs. To his astonishment, David saw nods of approval breaking through the skepticism. He felt a stirring inside him, a flicker of confidence igniting. Maybe this wasn't just a presentation, it could be a conversation. He spoke passionately about how social media platforms could offer insights into customer preferences, how engagement metrics held the key to shaping their approach. As he elaborated, the tension in the room shifted. Conversations buzzed with energy as he engaged with the executives, weaving in and out of discussion, expanding his ideas as they grew more animated. Unbeknownst to him, the shift in the atmosphere symbolized his ascent. Those quiet moments in the corner were beginning to fade, replaced by a powerful presence at the table. David couldn't remember the last time he felt this alive. The spark of connection grew, and he was no longer just a voice speaking into the void. He was part of something larger, a collaboration that transcended titles. When he concluded, the room erupted in discussion, ideas flying through the air like fireworks. The meeting wrapped up with buzz and excitement, and Linda turned to him with a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "You've done great work, David." At that moment, a cascade of emotions hit him, elation mixed with disbelief intertwined in a dance. He asked, uncertain. "Absolutely," she replied. Weeks transformed into a whirlwind of activity as David threw himself into developing the project. He dove into data, met with various teams, and honed his strategies. The quiet young man who once waited in the corner began to emerge as a capable leader, 2 steps ahead of the game. But the journey wasn't without struggles. Self-doubt would creep in during long hours of work, sharp whispers in a quiet room reminding him of the time when he was unheard. At times, he would sit in his office alone and wonder if any of this would last. Then he'd remind himself of that moment, the exhilaration of being seen and heard at the conference table. As weeks passed, his colleagues began to see him differently. Conversations flowed his way, thoughts exchanged like currency. They sought his insights as if he had always been there. With every meeting, David felt solidifying roots, deepening his place in the organization. One warm afternoon, as he sat reviewing a presentation, Linda called him into her office once again. The walls, lined with accolades and memories of triumph, seemed to pulse with opportunity. She looked serious, which gave his stomach a flutter. "David," she began, "I want you to lead the presentation at the upcoming annual company meeting." The weight of her words struck him like lightning. The idea sent a rush of fear through him, but beneath that fear, a thrill surged. This was a chance to shine, to step fully into the light. "Yes," she confirmed, smiling. Days turned to a blur as he prepared for the annual meeting. He practiced relentlessly, laying out every detail, but this felt different. There was something about the gravity of the event that ignited his spirit. The anticipation electrified every fiber in him. Finally, the day arrived. The large conference room was packed with the company's most esteemed executives. The energy was palpable. As David stepped onto the stage, it felt larger than life, an arena where dreams met reality. He began to speak, his voice steady yet vital. "Thank you all for being here today," he said, scanning the room as if peering through a lens focused on the future. Today is not just about numbers or projections. As he shared his insights, he felt a convergence of time and effort that led to this very moment. The nerves that once gripped him transformed into a powerful resolve. He was no longer that timid figure in the corner of the room. Now he was a leader, articulating not just ideas, but a vision that encompassed everyone present. With every slide he clicked, he felt the connection deepen. The discussions ignited flames of inspiration, and the executives were engaged, nodding along, asking questions, wanting to know more. David thrived in that environment, and each moment fueled his confidence beyond comprehension. As he delivered the final statistics, the atmosphere shifted into a wave of applause. It crashed over him, lifting him off the ground. Linda stood among the applause, pride shining in her expression. She called out. The meeting concluded, and David stepped off the stage, overwhelmed yet exhilarated. For the first time, he felt like he had truly earned his place at the head of the table. It was a transformative moment, not just for the team, but for him personally. Days passed into weeks, and with each interaction, he cemented his role as a trusted decision-maker. He was a man once waiting in a corner, now confidently stepping in front of the camera, leading initiatives and influencing company direction. But the journey was never about climbing the corporate ladder. It was about understanding the value of voices, every voice, and the strength found in collaboration. Something shifted in him, where the whisper of self-doubt began to transform into a roar of self-belief. One afternoon, he found himself reflecting on how far he had come while standing in the very corner where everything had begun. The walls felt different now, like pillars of strength. He turned that corner, and instead of shrinking away, he had grown, nurtured by the belief of others and, more importantly, by his newfound belief in himself. He glanced at the conference table, a space once dominated by trepidation, now brimming with opportunity. The head seat was no longer just a position. It was a testament to resilience, to the spirited struggle of finding one's voice in the world. David walked out of that conference room, each stride intentional, every footfall echoing promise. He had transformed not only his career, but the very narrative of himself, a story not defined by the shadows of hesitation, but by the vibrant light of possibility. This was his moment, where he began writing the next chapter in bold strokes. There were still journeys ahead, but the waiting was over. He was here to lead, to inspire, and to share not just data, but a vision for the future that belonged to everyone. And as he stepped into the world beyond the conference room, the world awaited him ready, eager, and full of promise. He waited in the corner, heart racing, his hands clammy against the cool surface of the conference table. All around him, energy crackled. Executives strolled in, exchanging casual banter, laughter echoing off the polished walls. But David felt like a leaf adrift in a storm. Today marked the quarterly meeting, an event that could shift tides for the entire company, and he was just a junior analyst, hovering on the edges, invisible. The clock ticked, the hands moving inexorably toward the hour. The title felt like a weight on his chest. Here he was supposed to contribute, but where was his voice in this chorus of confidence? As the executives took their seats, Linda, the head of the department, called the meeting to order. With her commanding presence, she exuded a mix of authority and approachability. David couldn't help but admire her. 10 years ago, she had been where he was, waiting for a chance to be heard. She'd transformed into a powerhouse, and today she still sparked inspiration in others. "Let's start with the data review," Linda announced, glancing around the room. "David, you've compiled insights from the market trends." The question jolted him like a thunderclap. All eyes turned toward him, and for a fleeting moment the world went silent. I'm sure," he murmured, trying to steady his trembling hands. He stepped toward the front, taking a deep breath. Back in the safety of his cubicle, he had imagined this moment. Yet now, standing under the scrutiny of so many, the weight of expectation nearly crushed him. He glanced at the slides he had prepared, his mind racing. "I analyzed the sales trends over the last quarter. There's been a noticeable decline in our performance in several key markets." His voice was shaky, but he pressed on, feeling the stares burn into him. At that moment, he felt like a tightrope walker, balancing precariously on his thin wire of confidence. He pointed to his charts, showing dips and peaks like mountains and valleys, hoping to illustrate his point clearly. Linda nodded, encouraging him. David swallowed hard, gathering strength. A targeted marketing strategy based on customer feedback could revitalize interest in our products. For an instant, silence hung in the air like an unspent bullet, leaving him vulnerable under the scrutiny of experienced eyes. But then something shifted. Carol, a senior manager known for her sharp insights, leaned forward. "David, that's a compelling approach." The question felt like a lifeline thrown to him. He seized it, embellishing his ideas and weaving them into a robust narrative. Eyes that had once seemed indifferent began to brighten with interest. The murmurs of delight spread, fueling his momentum. "I believe conducting customer surveys and leveraging social media analytics could provide invaluable insights. This opens doors for real-time engagement with our audience," he answered, nervous but fueled by the energy in the room. Just as he neared the conclusion of his presentation, David caught a look of approval from Linda. Her smile radiated warmth, sending a surge of encouragement coursing through him. "Excellent points, David," she said, a shift in her tone signifying a newfound respect. After the meeting wrapped, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. The executives lingered in groups discussing David's suggestions. He stood back, quietly absorbing it all. He whispered to himself, a spark of disbelief flashing through him. Carol approached him. "You did a great job today, David." Her compliment felt like a warm embrace. "Absolutely," he replied, his voice steadier now. Encouraged by the approval, he felt a newfound sense of belonging. This was not just a job, it was a team, and he was learning to be a part of it. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of action. Emails exchanged, strategies developed, and brainstorming sessions replaced lonely hours in his cubicle. And with each step he took, David felt the shadows of doubt retreating. He didn't just want to contribute, he wanted to excel. One late afternoon, while poring over data, Linda called him into her office. Her face was lit with enthusiasm, and the walls adorned with accolades seemed to shimmer. "David," she began, her voice ringing with conviction, "I'm impressed with your progress. We need someone to lead our upcoming project." Shock coursed through him, rattling his bones. He asked, his mind racing. The idea sent chills down his spine, not out of fear, but possibility. She affirmed, her eyes alight with certainty. "You've proven yourself capable." David's heart soared, but a flutter of anxiety twisted within him. What if he wasn't ready? What if he faltered under the pressure? But then a grounding voice whispered this was his chance to break through. He deserved to seize this moment. "I'd be honored," he said, a newfound determination igniting the words. As the days turned into weeks, preparations took on a life of their own. David dove into research, gathering data and creating presentations, wrapping his ideas in passion and purpose. With every late night spent refining plans, he felt himself transform. Each challenge he faced acted like a blacksmith's hammer, reshaping his insecurities into strengths. Fast forward to the day of the presentation, an important company-wide meeting where he would share his work with all the executives. Standing backstage, he felt a cacophony of emotions swirling inside. Excitement danced with nerves, a fierce storm brewing as he waited for his moment. When he stepped out, everything shifted. The CEO and senior executives filled the room, their eyes fixed on him. The buzz of anticipation charged the air, electrifying his spirit. He set his shoulders back and took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment. "Thank you all for being here," he began confidently, glancing at the audience. He presented his strategies with precision, weaving in stories of engagement with customers drawn from his insights, illustrating a path forward on a vibrant tapestry of opportunity. His voice resonated through the room, commanding attention. He felt the energy flow clear, powerful, and unyielding. Ideas sparked, discussions ignited, the executives leaned forward, engaged and intrigued by the vision he had painted. As he concluded, the room erupted into applause. David looked out and saw smiling faces, genuine appreciation reflecting in their eyes. The acknowledgement washed over him like sunlight breaking through a storm. In that moment, he understood the true metamorphosis he had undergone. No longer the timid analyst in the corner, he had become a leader commanding respect. After the meeting, the air was electric with chatter. Carol approached him again, her expression sparkling with enthusiasm. "You've really stepped up this time," she exclaimed. Their conversations transformed into deeper collaborations, solidifying David's role within the team. No longer a newcomer, he had become a critical asset, engaged in strategic discussions that rippled through the company. One evening, David climbed the stairs to his office, a space buzzing with ideas. The quiet hum of the city outside felt different now. The noise had transformed into a symphony of potential. He sat at his desk, flapping pages stacked high with notes, research, and ideas. He glanced at the corner of his office, the very spot where he would reflect on how far he had come. He couldn't help but smile. Weeks passed, and with each interaction, his confidence solidified. He joined brainstorming sessions with senior management, freely sharing insights and suggestions. Feedback was no longer met with skepticism, but rather anticipation. Every meeting could turn into a celebration, a fusion of voices working toward shared goals. Then came the moment he never could have imagined. Linda called him into her office once again, her demeanor serious but proud. "David, I want you to consider stepping into a more prominent role." Those words cascaded over him, but now they felt like an invitation rather than a burden. "You've gathered a team behind you who respects your vision. It's time to take the head seat at the conference table," she encouraged. His heart soared, grounded in the understanding that this was a culmination of everything he had worked for. "I appreciate that, Linda. I believe I'm ready to take on that challenge," he declared, feeling a resolute strength within him. As he took the plunge into his new role, everything shifted again. David embraced the leap, knowing he'd be taking on new responsibilities, engaging with fresh challenges. But now he felt equipped, he had forged his own path. As he sat at the head seat during his first critical meeting, he glanced around at the faces of his team, the weight of responsibility settling comfortably on his shoulders. The world outside his office had grown vastly different. He was no longer the kid waiting in the corner, longing for acknowledgement. He had stepped into his purpose, taking charge not only of his own fate but impacting the entire team. In that moment of realization, David understood the importance of every experience that had led him here. The journey from the shadows had never been just about ambition, but also about the people he connected with, the ideas he nurtured, and the belief he cultivated in himself. He took a deep breath, ready to lead the way forward. No longer waiting in the corner, he was defining his own narrative, weaving a story of resilience, collaboration, and leadership into the very fabric of the company he loved. And as the meeting began, he spoke with confidence, his voice carrying the weight of purpose that echoed in the hearts of everyone present. This was just the beginning. With eyes set on the horizon, he prepared to lead his team into the future boldly, intentionally, and without hesitation. He waited in the corner, heart thundering in his chest, the world around him blurred by anxiety. The conference room buzzed with activity, a whirlwind of laughter and animated chatter. David leaned against the wall, hidden in the shadows as familiar voices rang out, confident and assertive. It was the quarterly meeting, a crucial event where decisions shaped futures, but right now, he felt like an outsider peering into a world where he didn't belong. His hands fidgeted with the notepad in his grip, the edges worn from countless hours of preparation. As he glanced at his colleagues, each one seemed to carry weight, commanding presence in their crisp suits like seasoned warriors ready for battle. They were men and women he admired, but all he felt was the cold grip of self-doubt. Would anyone notice if he didn't speak? Would they care? The room filled quickly, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor mingling with the aroma of strong coffee and polished wood. Linda, the head of the department, strode in, a commanding presence that cut through the noise like a knife. When her eyes landed on him, she smiled. David, perfect timing. Time froze for a split second. Every eye in the room shifted to him. He felt the heat rising to his cheeks, the rush of vulnerability flooding over him. He managed to stammer, the reality of the moment sinking in like a stone. Linda encouraged, her tone firm yet supportive. You've been analyzing the sales data. He pushed off the wall, forcing his legs to move, but each step felt like walking through molasses. As he positioned himself at the front of the room, he could feel the anticipation humming in the air. David took a deep breath, glancing down at the slides he had prepared. Thank you all for being here, he began, his voice wobbly at first. He detailed the numbers he'd crunched, the shifts he had observed. Our sales have dropped in key regions, and if we don't act now, we risk losing more than just revenue. Nervous beads of sweat glistened on his brow as he spoke about reallocating resources and targeting specific markets, but slowly he started to find his rhythm. He glanced around the room, expecting to see boredom, but instead he saw engaged expressions. When he mentioned the potential for client engagement strategies, he caught Carol, a senior manager known for her sharp wit, nodding thoughtfully. That's interesting, David, she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. A spark flared in him. I believe we should utilize social media analytics to understand customer behavior better. The words flowed more freely now, each point building on the last. His confidence began to swell, and the room buzzed with interest. When he finished, murmurs of approval rippled through the conference room. David felt an unexpected surge of exhilaration. Linda leaned in, her smile bright. Great insights, David. As he stepped back, the applause warmed his cheeks. He had shared his thoughts, been met with genuine interest, and most importantly, he had transformed from a silenced observer into an active participant. The feeling was intoxicating. In the days that followed, David dove into his newfound role with zeal. He collaborated with Carol and others, developing strategies that pulled from both data and creativity. He relished the late nights spent brainstorming ideas and the teamwork that sprouted from mutual respect. However, amidst the excitement, self-doubt lingered. Would this momentum last? Whenever he sat alone in his cubicle, his confidence wavered like a candle in the wind. But then he would remind himself of that first meeting, the thrill of being heard and valued. It was a turning point, and he was determined to capitalize on it. Weeks rolled on, and soon it was time for a big presentation showcasing their efforts. The project had grown into something substantial, and the stakes were high. David found himself pacing in his apartment, rehearsing in front of the mirror, his heart pounding as if he were about to take the stage of a grand theater. On the day of the presentation, David wore his best suit, a gift from his parents that he had saved for such an occasion. As he walked into the conference room, the atmosphere felt charged with energy. He noticed Linda chatting with the CEO, their laughter echoing as they exchanged thoughts. Finally, it was his turn to present. The room fell silent as he moved to the front, heart racing, palms sweating. Thank you all for being here today. I'm excited to share the strategies we've developed to enhance our customer engagement, he began, meeting the eyes of the executives. With each slide, he illustrated the journey they had taken. Statistics, successes, and potential pitfalls were all laid bare. He laid out the groundwork for targeted campaigns that would resonate with their audience, and the executives grew more engaged. It was no longer just about numbers, it was about vision. As he spoke, he realized he was leading a discussion, drawing out input and inspiring ideas. He felt a shift, a transformation from the anxious young man in the corner to a commanding presence at the front. The applause at the end felt different this time, no longer just acceptance, but genuine respect. After the presentation, the buzz in the room was electric. Linda approached David, her eyes glinting with pride. "Awesome work, David. You really nailed it today." A rush of adrenaline surged through him. He echoed, trying to absorb the magnitude of her words. Yes, her confidence in him ignited a fire that had been flickering dimly within. He felt the weight of doubt lifting. This was the moment he had yearned for. In the following months, David not only led the initiatives, but became a driving force within the company. People began to seek him out for insights and strategies. With every meeting, he felt the tapestry of his role weaving itself more intricately into the fabric of the team. No longer did he stand in corners, he stood at the center of engagement and collaboration. But the path was not without its challenges. The pressures of leadership loomed large, and moments of doubt still surfaced. He faced setbacks, met with resistance from stakeholders who questioned his ideas. Each obstacle felt like a mountain to climb, but he no longer hesitated. Instead, he confronted them head-on, learning and adapting. Through these experiences, he discovered the essence of true leadership, not merely guiding, but also listening, adapting, and fostering growth. The shadow of doubt gradually faded into the background, replaced by the bright glow of self-belief. One memorable Friday afternoon, as he finalized preparations for another meeting, David realized he was no longer the hesitant young man who waited in the corner. He had evolved into a confident leader, ready to tackle anything that came his way. When Linda called him into her office later that day, he sensed something significant. Her demeanor was serious. "David, I want to discuss your future here," she began. "You've shown exceptional growth and leadership." The gravity of her words enveloped him. He asked, feeling his heart quicken. "I believe you're ready for an executive position," she replied, a smile creeping onto her face. Shock and disbelief washed over him. The junior analyst had come so far, climbing from the corner to the head seat at the conference table. He stammered, the reality dawning slowly. "Dead serious," she affirmed, her smile steady. "The company needs leaders like you people who can inspire others. I'll be poolside when we discuss your new position at the next level." David felt a rush of emotions flooding through him, joy, appreciation, and an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. "I'm in," he said, his voice firm. The following weeks filled with excitement and anticipation as David stepped fully into his new role. He embraced the responsibilities of leadership with a fire that lit up every corner of the office. Meetings thrummed with energy as discussions turned into collaborative endeavors. The connection with his team deepened, fueled by a shared vision. As he settled into his responsibilities, he was often reminded of that first moment waiting in the corner, feeling lost and alone. It was a stark contrast to how he felt today, confidently sharing ideas, earning respect, and inspiring others with kindness and purpose. One afternoon, he stood in front of the same conference room where he had felt so small years ago. The space had turned into a symbol of growth, transformation, and opportunity. He looked around, savored the moment, and marveled at how far he had come. From waiting in the corner to taking the head seat at the conference table, David had not simply changed his position within the company, he had transformed his life. Each challenge, every twist and turn on the journey taught him resilience, vision, and the true meaning of leadership. As he prepared for yet another meeting, he took a moment to reflect on his journey. The laughter echoed around him, a reminder that every voice mattered, shaping the narrative of their collective story. This was their united vision, a tapestry woven together by dreams and determination. He stepped into the room, ready to lead. The energy coursed through him, a blend of gratitude and excitement. The future was bright, and he was prepared to storm ahead with his team, illuminating the path to success together. He waited in the corner, heart pounding like a drum as the room gradually filled with the top executives of the company. The conference table was polished to a shine, reflecting the warm overhead lights while laughter and chatter bounced off the walls. David stood there, a mere silhouette against the backdrop of confidence and charisma radiating from his colleagues. As he fidgeted with his hands, he couldn't shake the feeling of being a bystander, a ghost lurking in the shadows. The stakes felt higher today. The quarterly results meeting could make or break careers. David had spent countless hours preparing, poring over numbers and trends, but all he could think about was how small and insignificant he seemed compared to the seasoned professionals in the room. Linda, the head of sales, strode in, her presence commanding immediate attention. She exuded a fierce energy that lit up the room, her tailored suit a testament to authority. "All right, everyone," she started, still settling into her seat. "Let's dive in." A pit formed in David's stomach. Every eye turned toward him, and he felt like he was standing under a spotlight, more vulnerable than ever. He mumbled, disbelief sweeping through him like an electric shock. For a split second, he considered slipping away unnoticed. Linda encouraged, her smile warm yet demanding. David took a deep breath, pushing off the wall as he approached the front of the room. His mind raced with thoughts. What if he crashed and burned? What if they laughed? He forced himself to focus on the data and the urgency of the moment. With shaky hands, he flipped to his first slide, detailing the decline in sales across several critical regions. I've analyzed our current market trends and noticed our performance has declined significantly in regions A and B, he said, his voice trembling at first. If we don't act quickly, we could lose a significant share of our market. He could sense the skepticism in the room, the raised eyebrows and the muted murmurs. As he continued, his confidence wavered. That familiar feeling of inadequacy washed over him. But then he glanced at Linda, who nodded encouragingly, and something in him shifted. By investing in targeted marketing strategies and enhancing our customer engagement efforts, we could potentially boost our performance significantly, he said, desperation seeping into his words. To his surprise, Carol, a senior manager known for her forthrightness, leaned forward. That's an interesting point, David. Encouraged, he plunged deeper into his plan. If we utilize social media analytics to gauge customer sentiment, we could craft campaigns that resonate. David felt the gravity of the room shift. The executives leaned in, attention peaked, and he grasped his newfound voice with both hands. Each slide transitioned smoothly, each point resonating with the growing interest around the table. Suddenly, he wasn't just another junior analyst, he was part of the fabric of the conversation. Ideas bounced around, and he felt himself riding the wave of enthusiasm rather than struggling against it. As he concluded his presentation, a wave of applause cascaded through the room. David's heart soared, the acknowledgement was overwhelming. Linda smiled at him, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. Great job, David, you've brought amazing insights to the table. Walking back to his spot, something had changed within him. The weight of self-doubt that had clung to him like a shroud began to lift. The discussions that followed now involved him. Colleagues approached to share their thoughts on his presentation, asking questions, engaging with the ideas he had put forth. The sense of belonging he had longed for felt real at last. Days turned into weeks as David immersed himself in his work. He collaborated with Carol and others, developing actionable strategies based on the insights he had shared. Sitting at his desk felt different now. It wasn't just a place of numbers anymore. It was a hub of creativity and innovation. But even as David's confidence grew, so did the weight of expectations. One evening after a long day, he sat in his cubicle staring at a wall of sales charts. What if this was a fluke? What if he didn't live up to the praise? The fear gnawed at him, whispering doubts that threatened to snuff out his newfound spirit. He glanced back at his notes, and for a fleeting moment, inertia threatened to pull him back into the corner. But then he remembered the way he had felt standing in front of that conference table, the applause ringing like music in his ears. He couldn't let that moment fade into a whisper. David took a deep breath and committed to pushing forward. Finally, it was time for a big presentation, the culmination of all the strategies developed over the past weeks. Nerves bubbled to the surface as he prepared, rehearsing his points, smoothing out his delivery, ensuring every detail was covered. On the day of the presentation, he dressed in the best suit. He owned a navy-tailored jacket that made him feel a bit more heroic. As he entered the conference room, the air buzzed with anticipation. The executives were gathered, their expressions a mix of eagerness and skepticism. His heart raced. He was back at the starting line, except this time his legs didn't waver. "Thank you all for joining today," he started, letting his voice fill the room. As he showcased his carefully crafted strategies, he felt the tides shift again. He was not just speaking, he was guiding a conversation, drawing people in. The executives nodded, smiles creeping onto their faces as they engaged with the material. He articulated the challenges and opportunities, built scenarios they could visualize, and proposed solutions that felt both actionable and impactful. This was his moment, and as he spoke, he remembered the young man who had waited in the corner, the one who had doubted himself. "This is not just my plan," he thought, "it's our plan." When he finished, he stood tall, confident in what he had shared. The applause echoed through the room, and in a heartbeat, David felt the surge of fulfillment and pride. Linda stood up, a gleam of approval shining in her eyes. "This is exactly what we need." That moment solidified something inside him. It was not a fluke, it was a validation of his hard work and growth. He was part of a team that valued his contributions, and slowly, the shadows of self-doubt began to dissipate. Days that followed, David's transformation continued. His colleagues sought him out for brainstorming sessions, scouting talent and fresh ideas. He no longer hid in a corner, he led discussions, encouraging others to share their thoughts and insights. He became a bridge between management and the team, fostering collaboration and community. But soon after, the winds shifted again. A critical project was announced, one that required leadership and strong direction. Linda called David into her office. Her expression was serious, but there was warmth in her gaze. The gravity of her words sank in. "Lead." The idea sent ripples of excitement and dread coursing through him. "Absolutely, you have proven yourself time and again," she affirmed. "This is your chance to shine, to take that head seat at the table." David felt the imposter syndrome creeping back but shook it off. "Okay, I'll do it," he replied, determination rising in his chest. Over the next few weeks, he poured himself into the project, developing strategies, conducting meetings, and aligning his vision with the team. Each new challenge felt like a test, pushing him further out of his comfort zone. He learned to embrace the pressure, lean into the discomfort, and lead with empathy. But even as he excelled, old habits crept back in. The doubt resurfaced at night as he lay in bed, replaying the day's events, wondering if he had made the right decisions. But each time he would remember that pivotal moment, the day he had stepped out of the corner and into the light. Every setback was part of the journey, a lesson to be learned, another step up the ladder. Finally, the day of the project presentation arrived. David stood in front of a new audience, the CEO, board members, and the very executives who had once seemed so intimidating. As he stood at the front of the room, he glanced at each face, remembering how far he had come from waiting in the shadows. "Thank you for being here today," he started, his voice steady. As he unfolded their comprehensive strategy, energy filled the room. He spoke with authority, confidence surging through him like wildfire. Each statistic, each projection was carefully crafted, a testament to the hours of hard work and dedication poured into the project. When he wrapped up, applause erupted. David stood speechless, his heart racing. The acknowledgement felt like a warm blanket wrapping around him. Linda beamed at him, her expression filled with pride. "Incredible work, David," each moment replayed in his mind, from waiting in the corner to the standing confidently at the head of the table. The journey had been anything but straightforward, riddled with self-doubt, but it had led him to clarity and strength. This was not just about what he had achieved, it was about every setback that had pushed him forward. Days turned into weeks again, and with each passing moment his confidence showed no signs of wavering. David had evolved not just as an employee but as a leader. He began mentoring others, guiding newcomers, sharing lessons learned on his journey from obscurity to prominence. Looking around the conference room, he felt a sense of pride swelling within him. No longer was he the quiet guy lurking in the corner. He had reclaimed his narrative, transforming it from one of uncertainty into one of possibility. As he envisioned the future, he saw a landscape filled with opportunities, challenges to embrace, innovations to explore. Each accomplishment was no longer just a personal victory, they were collective wins that defined a team. This was his new reality. David took a moment to allow it all to sink in. The strains of hard work and the spirit of collaboration had illuminated the path for him. He was ready for whatever came next, and as he stepped into the next meeting, prepared to guide discussions and share visions, he felt the echoes of his journey, a reminder that every great leader once waited in the shadows before stepping into the light. The conference table wasn't just a table, it was a stage where stories unfolded, and he was here to lead the way. He waited in the corner, heart thudding against his ribcage, the buzz of conversation swirling around him like a chaotic storm. The conference room was filled to the brim with energy, everyone bubbling with excitement for the quarterly meeting. But David felt like a ghost, hovering just out of reach, the shadows of self-doubt wrapping around him like a thick fog. He looked down at his rumpled shirt, a stark contrast to the tailored suits of the executives who strode confidently into the room. As they took their seats, laughter erupted, echoing against the polished walls. The laughter of seasoned professionals seemed to mock him, a reminder of how far removed he was from their world. Today was crucial. Today could change everything. This wasn't just another meeting, it was a chance to prove himself. David had spent nights poring over sales data, trying to find the narrative hidden within the numbers, a narrative that might illustrate the pitfalls and opportunities lurking behind the surface. Yet here he stood, forgotten in the corner, nervous and exposed. As Linda, the head of the department, entered, a hush fell over the room. She exuded an air of authority that instantly commanded respect. "All right, everyone," she said, glancing around the room. "Let's get started." The spotlight shifted to him, penetrating the bubble of isolation he had wrapped around himself. He stammered, fighting the urge to shrink back. Linda urged, an encouraging smile on her face. With a deep breath, he pushed off from the wall and stepped forward. He felt all eyes on him, sharp and scrutinizing. For a moment, he doubted everything he had prepared. What if he fumbled? What if he forgot his lines? Nevertheless, he grasped the stack of notes tightly in his hand and began. Thank you for the opportunity," he said, his voice shaky but resolute. "I've analyzed the sales data for the last quarter." He felt the words tumble out, gaining momentum like a snowball rolling downhill. "I propose we redirect our marketing efforts towards these areas." For an instant, silence fell in the room. David's heart raced. Was it skepticism, doubt? But then Carol, a senior manager with piercing green eyes, leaned forward. "Interesting perspective, David." Suddenly feeling anchored, he continued. "By leveraging social media analytics and directly engaging our customers, we could refine our strategies and better meet their needs." As he spoke, he noticed the tension begin to dissolve. Faces in the room softened, expressions shifting from doubt to curiosity. The executives leaned in, their interest palpable. The clutch of fear that had gripped him loosened slightly, and he found himself diving deeper into the data, discussing trends, projections, and opportunities with newfound vigor. As he wrapped up his presentation, the applause that followed felt like a warm wave washing over him. Linda said, her voice bright with pride, With each shake of hands and congratulatory nod, David felt the shadows recede. Perhaps the corner wasn't where he belonged after all. Perhaps it was at the table where the ideas sparked and flowed among equals. Days turned into weeks, and David became an integral part of the team. Colleagues sought him out for brainstorming sessions, eager to hear his insights and contribute ideas. Gone were the moments of isolation. He was building relationships, forging connections that mattered. But as the engagement grew, so did the stakes. A major project was announced, a strategic initiative that could impact the company's direction. Linda called a meeting, her demeanor serious. "This is a big one," she said, gathering the team's attention. The declaration landed like a thunderclap. He felt the eyes on him again, but this time they didn't feel cold or judging, they felt warm and supportive. He questioned, uncertainty creeping into his voice, a remnant of the doubt that lingered. "Absolutely," Linda said, her gaze steady. "You've proven yourself." But as the date loomed closer, David felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. Could he really handle this responsibility? What if he failed? Those whispers of insecurity nudged at him late at night, clawing at his resolve. Yet with each passing day, as he collaborated with his team, crafted strategies, and prepared for presentations, he also began to experience flashes of belief. Weeks of preparation culminated in a day like no other. The atmosphere in the conference room felt electric as he stood in front of an audience of executives' faces he had once deemed intimidating, now looking up to him with interest. He took a deep breath, grounding himself, and began. "Thank you all for being here today," he said, his voice gaining strength. As he laid out the strategies, outlining the steps they had planned to revitalize their approach, he felt momentum build. He was not just presenting numbers, he was weaving a narrative, a story of how the company could reclaim its market share and strengthen client relationships. But then, just as the energy peaked, a voice cut through the excitement, the COO, a formidable figure with a reputation for being critical. The question felt like a punch in the gut. The room fell silent and David's mind raced. His carefully rehearsed responses hung in the air like neglected ghosts. Self-doubt clawed at him, but something inside him stirred. He recalled the long nights spent analyzing data, the passion that fueled his commitment to better solutions. "Great question," he replied, searching for clarity. "I believe communication is key. We can roll out these initiatives in phases, gathering feedback at each stage." His response felt solid, anchored in the realities of teamwork. He pressed on, sharing how collaboration at each step would foster a culture of openness and adaptability. With every passing moment, he could feel the weight of self-doubt diminishing, swallowed by a rising wave of determination. As he concluded, applause rippled through the room. The executives exchanged glances, whispers filled with excitement. Linda stood with a proud smile on her face. "You did it, David," she said, leaning in. "You've taken us to a new level." Days turned into weeks, and David took charge of the project, guiding his team with a sense of newfound purpose. The initiatives rolled out seamlessly, each phase building upon the last, yet as their efforts bore fruit, the pressure mounted gradually. Expectations grew heavier. Growth meant more scrutiny, more eyes watching him. Then one fateful afternoon, during a routine check-in meeting, the atmosphere shifted. A senior executive, known for her fierce critiques, intervened. "David, the numbers look good, but I want to see more depth in your next reporting." Her words struck him like a bolt of lightning. A vulnerability he thought he had shed filled him again. The team looked at him, waiting for his response, and he felt the air thicken with tension. Unsure how to respond, he took a moment, struggling to balance the pressure of expectations against the realities of their emerging growth. "Absolutely, I appreciate the feedback," he finally managed, but doubt lingered in his mind. He wanted to argue against the unrealistic expectations, but couldn't seem to find his voice. As the meeting concluded, he left the conference room feeling heavier, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. Days later, as he sat in his office, staring blankly at graphs and projections, he wondered if it was all slipping away. What if he couldn't rise to the occasion? Sinking deeper into despair, he felt the familiar grip of doubt tightening around him. He thought of the corner where he had once waited, consumed by the fear of being overlooked. But then, in that moment of despair, something ignited inside him, a spark ignited by all he had accomplished. Sure, he faced challenges, but he had earned his place at the table. Dismissing the darker thoughts, he picked up the phone and called a team meeting. "Listen," he started, his voice firm. "We've done amazing work together. Yes, expectations have grown, but that's a sign of success. We're here because of our abilities. Let's review our data and see how we can adjust our projections without compromising our strategy." As he spoke, the energy in the room shifted. They engaged, brainstormed ideas, and together they crafted a feedback loop that resonated with everyone. Slowly, the atmosphere transformed from pressure to collaboration, igniting a fire of teamwork that fueled their ambitions. Just when it seemed the project was heading toward success, Linda called him into her office with an urgent look on her face. A wave of anxiety shot through him. He asked, his heart racing. David sensed something was brewing, but he could never have anticipated the bombshell that followed. Linda explained that a major investor had pulled out at the last moment, threatening to destabilize their plans. The project was now in jeopardy, and there would be no more room for error. David, we need to pivot fast and come up with a new strategy, one that makes a strong statement to our stakeholders, she said, urgency lacing her tone. His heart sank. Everything they had worked so hard for felt like it was crumbling before his eyes. He faltered, grappling with the enormity of the task. We have to reframe our goals and present a revamped plan to the board within 2 weeks. It's time to show what we're truly made of, Linda urged, her eyes searching his for resolve. As David left her office, he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him once again. This was it, the moment where everything could either shatter or soar. He would have to rally everyone, inspire them to push beyond the limits. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself that he had transformed from waiting in the corner to taking the lead. But was he truly ready for this storm? A storm that could either lift them all to new heights or drown them in dark waters. Determined but terrified, David steeled himself for what lay ahead. He knew he had to dig deep, muster every ounce of the strength he had gained along this journey, for the world was watching and they were counting on him. And as he prepared to confront the monumental task ahead, he stood at the precipice of a new beginning, but also on the brink of a storm that could change everything. Would he rise to the challenge, or would he fall and return to the shadows? With those thoughts swirling in his mind, he resolved to step forward, taking that first step toward an uncertain future. The path was unclear, but one thing was certain. The conference room was no longer a place of waiting in the dark. It was a battlefield, and he was determined to fight.